Super stoked to be welcoming Todd Zaki Warfel. Todd is a certified executive leadership and transformation coach. He works with individuals and organizations interested in personal growth, leadership development, and organizational transformation. Todd has held leadership roles at Workday, Cisco, and Twitter. So he definitely has lived through the trials and triumphs of transformation firsthand. If you are active in any of the well-known design communities, whether it be on Facebook or Slack groups, I'm sure you've seen Todd, helping folks out, and not just with a comment or an emoji reaction, but he usually is really, really patient with sharing, his approach and learnings in detail. So really excited to welcome Todd, talk all about organization structures, career progression, and the path to leadership. Welcome, Todd.
Okay, thanks, Brady. So I'll never forget that first walk around campus I took with my new manager. I had just joined Cisco as the global head of design for the collaboration group in a season of growth and transformation. And we were strolling through the campus and discussing my new charter, setting expectations for the coming months. Things like grow the design team 20% by the end of the year, increase the visibility of design inside and outside the company, elevate design leadership to the executive level. Now, these are all pretty standard for a head of design role. For a 25-year-old, 80,000 person enterprise tech company driven by engineering, they're a bit ambitious, even in Silicon Valley. And this was my first day at the rodeo. I had scaled and led teams before and knew the value of having documented career ladders. So I asked my manager the obvious question: do we have a documented career development ladder for design? My new manager kind of half smiled and replied, no. I mean, we have one for engineering and product management, but not for design. We've been discussing it for the past 5 years or so. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. Or maybe you could add that to your list too. Now, not long after that, I emailed a good friend of mine asking for advice. I wanted to know how I could elevate design in the DNA of a 25-year-old engineering-driven company. Now, the thing to know about Bob is that he's a longtime veteran of Silicon Valley. He's held executive roles at Apple, Pinterest, and now at ThoughtSpot. He's full of wisdom. I thought surely Bob would have some world-class sage advice. Well, his response was honest and curt. He said, I've never seen anyone survive that. Good luck. Yeah, that was it. That was his entire response. I might have just gotten myself in over my head on this one. Now, initially, I was a bit shocked that a company of this size, who had been around for over 2 decades, didn't have a career ladder for design. As it turns out, that's actually pretty common. While we've made a lot of headway over the years, gained a seat at the proverbial table and all that, companies are still trying to figure out what to do with design. My name is Todd Zaki Warfel, and I help leaders and organizations create the capacity for transformation to thrive. In this presentation, I'm going to share some insights from my 2019 Design Career Index report, which will include the top reasons why people left their last job, the importance and impact of career progression ladders, the 3 characteristics of effective career progression ladders, and the path to leadership. Now, make sure you stick around to the end, because I'm going to share a link so that you can get a free copy of the Career Index report and these slides. Well, let's dive in. Peter Drucker once stated that the most valuable assets a company had used to be in production equipment, but now it's people. He believed the people would become the most valuable asset of modern companies. Now, if Drucker is correct, and I believe that he is, then I'd like to ask you, what are we doing to connect our people to purpose, to develop them, give them equity, ownership, and opportunities for growth and leadership? As leaders, we really need to do a better job at creating a culture for growth for our people. I'd like to share a few sobering statistics with you. According to a study conducted by Gartner, over half of your employees are actively looking for new opportunities due to poor leadership and management. We need to be investing more in people, not just process and tools. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, 3.5 million people in the US left their jobs voluntarily in October 2018 to seek employment elsewhere. That's up from 3.1 million people in February of 2018. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. People are leaving their jobs at an alarming rate. And the recent COVID-19 pandemic has only complicated the situation, creating a massive talent pool of people who both willingly and unwillingly left their most recent job. What can we do? Well, as leaders, we're in the people business. People come to work with us and for us, and they leave because of us. In 2019, I published the Design Career Index Report. It's the largest independent global study on career progression, leadership, and organizational health. One of the themes explored in the report is reasons for attrition. So when I asked, why did you leave your last role? These were the top responses. Now, if we look at the top 6 reasons, these are all things that... Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was just not sure if you were moving ahead, but we are still seeing just the first slide.
No, I'm well into the deck at this point. Let me try and...
Yeah, I was just like, maybe it's the introduction part, and now we are going ahead. But
okay, let me do this. Let me escape. Okay, let's try that again. Let me stop screen sharing. We'll restart screen sharing. Okay, you should be seeing 47% poor leadership management.
We are seeing presenting with confidence. We are seeing the other view where, kind of the keynote view and not the presenter view.
Well, that's interesting because I only have one monitor on here.
Is that another? That's weird. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let's. What if we do this? What if I try and just share maybe the desktop and see if that works? Let's try this. Let's share the desktop.
Okay. Yes. Now we see 47% in keynote, and now we see the present. Yeah.
Okay, let me do this. And how's that? You got a chart in front of you?
Yeah.
We see the lovely.
Thank you. Sorry for that.
Hey, I'm glad that you stopped me. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's some Zoom update that they did some funky stuff. So
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So these were the top reasons, and so now you can see the chart. Yeah. All right. So these are the top reasons why people left. Now, again, if we look at the top 6, these are things that as leaders we can do something about. If we zoom in to the top 2 reasons why people left their last role, 47% of people left their last role due to poor leadership and management. So if you've ever left a job due to poor leadership or management, go ahead and type me in the comments or the chat window. Or maybe, just maybe, you've been the poor leader or manager, which resulted in somebody leaving. See, people don't leave companies. They leave managers and leaders. Now, coming in at number 2 on the list, 35% said that they left their last role due to a lack of career path. In short, they didn't see a future for themselves at their current company. Now, if you've ever left a job due to the lack of a career path or future opportunities, go ahead and type me in the comments or the chat window. Look, if people don't see a future at your company, they'll find their future somewhere else. It's our responsibility as leaders to connect our people with purpose. When people leave your team, it's not just inconvenient. It's also incredibly expensive. How expensive? Well, glad you asked. For an entry to mid-level employee, the cost of them leaving is around 40% of their annual salary. For senior level makers to mid-level managers, that cost goes up to 125 to 150% of their annual salary. And for executives, that cost skyrockets to 213% of their annual salary. All right, so how do we calculate that? That's another great question. Josh Burson of Deloitte illustrates how to calculate the return zone of an employee. Now, that's the point where you start to create value for the company in your new role. Up until this point, you're simply a cost or maybe an investment to the company. But the return point is just one factor in determining how much it costs a company when an employee leaves. There are other factors we have to consider, including the loss in productivity, impact on the culture. The productivity of others typically takes a dive. Oftentimes, when one person leaves, others will follow. There's a cost of posting and advertising the job opening, cost of filtering resumes and interviewing, onboarding and training prior to their first assignment. I mean, you get the idea. Okay, I want to shift gears for a minute and discuss one of the greatest challenges companies are facing today. And bear with me when I share this. Millennials and Gen Z. Now, first off, I'm not here to knock millennials or Gen Z. I simply want to share a couple of insights that can help companies navigate the future of work as it relates to millennials and Gen Z. One of the things that we uncovered in the research is that companies just aren't equipped to handle many of the challenges presented by the incoming generations. A lot of them are still waiting for them to arrive. And if you're in that boat, well, I hate to break it to you, you're already too late. According to Gartner, millennials already make up roughly 51% of the workforce. Now, when you combine millennials with Gen Z, some estimates put that number at closer to 70% of the workforce. So why does that even matter? Well, these generations put a higher value on people and purpose in their work than the Gen X and baby boomers. They've also grown up in an environment where they essentially own nothing. Their music is on Spotify, their hotels are Airbnb, their cars are Uber and Lyft, their offices are WeWork. They're a generation that owns nothing. And so perhaps their careers are one of the few things that they can own, which explains why they have an accelerated expectation for career growth. So what can we do? How can we as leaders help support the future generations? How can we set them up for success? How can we align expectations and take the focus away from titles and shift it towards career development? Well, one of the key findings in the Career Index report was that companies with documented career ladders and leaders at the executive level had a 50% higher employee engagement rate and up to a 250% longer retention rate. Now, with these kinds of numbers, you'd expect that every company would have a documented career ladder, right? Not so fast. In fact, less than 1/3 of companies have a documented career ladder for design. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound too bad, except that most of these are just a pay band scale, which basically means it's just a short title, description, and a pay rate. It's not anything that can be used in planning your career or leveling up your skills. To do that, you need a competency-based career ladder. Something that includes actual skills and a rubric to assess those skills and development over time. Competency-based career progression models for design were only found in 1% of the companies. 1%. That's not great. So why don't we see them more often? Well, in the research, we heard a number of responses, but the most common ones included some form of, we've been working on it, but we just haven't launched it yet. Other priorities keep getting in the way. Look, I've got a full-time job and career ladders is not it. Or isn't that HR's responsibility? Listen, you do not want HR creating your career ladder for design. I've worked on a few dozen career development ladders for companies. Most of the industry data that HR has access to can be useful for sales or marketing roles, not so much for product engineering or design. Okay, would you like to see what makes an effective career progression ladder? Like I said, I've studied a few dozen, and I've helped a few dozen companies build theirs. And there are 3 key characteristics to effective career progression ladders. Oh, by the way, just to be clear, when I say effective, I'm speaking from the perspective of useful for people to use to develop their career paths. Systems that are easy for HR to deploy but are not useful for people to use for career development do not meet the success criteria for being effective. Okay, so what does a successful career progression framework look like? They should include a set of established norms for both skills and mastery of those skills. They should have separate development paths for ICs and managers. And the IC path shouldn't require going into management. The most effective career ladder models have a rubric for evaluating those skills at various levels. So let's start with a set of established norms. In this model, you can see a competency matrix that includes skills for both ICs or makers and managers or leaders. Now, there are 16 skill sets across 5 groups for makers and 16 skill sets across 4 groups for managers or leaders. You might notice that some of the skills transfer over, some do not. Next, your career progression framework should have separate tracks for makers and managers. Now, here's an example of what that might look like. As you can see, this includes levels for both ICs and leadership. They run in parallel, and there are several points where a person can move between the IC maker role and leadership roles. While these titles are fairly standard, we've seen some pretty wild variations on this model. On the low end, we've found career ladders with as few as 5 levels. On the higher end, typically in larger corporations, we've found as many as 9. Next, let's look at how we should establish levels of competency. It helps to think of competency in 2 ways. One is through a description of mastery, and the other is scope of impact and influence. Now, in this example, we can see the assessment canvas. And on the left, you'll find a 1 to 5 scale with language that describes an increase in mastery. At the lowest levels, you'll find a title of novice and verbiage like learning. On the highest levels, you'll find master and acts as an evangelist. Now, we've also included a reference to the scope or reach of their impact and influence. You can think of it like the rings of a tree. At the center, which is the lowest level of reach, the person's responsibility, impact, and influence doesn't regularly extend beyond themselves or maybe a narrow part of the product or project that they're working on. On the highest levels, the outermost rings, the person's responsibility, impact, and influence regularly extends beyond the company out into the industry. Now, in this example, we're looking at one of the personal development skills under the ownership category. Now, based on the tree rings at the right, you can assess this person appears to be fairly strong on craft, engagement, and ownership. Their opportunities for improvement are in the communication and influence space. Their development plan, therefore, should include strategies for improving communication and influence. As a manager, you can use this assessment to increase the awareness of each individual team member's strengths and weaknesses. You can plan intentional development plans for each team member. Hire intentionally, hiring to fill gaps rather than just hiring more of the same. You can plan your org model, improve awareness for team diversity, improve your one-on-ones, reduce bias in promotion cycles. And you can identify who might be a good candidate for leadership. Now, as an IC or maker, you can own your own career path. You can use this to increase the awareness of your own strengths and weaknesses. You can identify a development plan to move to the next level. You can use it to work with your manager, to be paired with someone who complements you. You can use it to find a coach, mentor, or even create an inner circle of advisors with strengths where you need to improve. You can take control of your journey. Design your career, or it will be designed for you. Which leads us to our final topic, the path to leadership and management. Now, as an executive coach, when I'm working with someone who's interested in going into management, my first question is always, why? Oftentimes, the initial response I get has to do with prestige, title, and an increase in pay. While these are nice, they are not the reasons to go into management. Leadership is not a position. It's a responsibility. It isn't about power or position. It is about pay. And while those might come with the role, anyone going into management because of those reasons will be a bad manager and do more harm than good. And with half of the employees leaving due to poor management or leadership, it's important to understand what good leadership is. So looking back at the leadership competency assessment canvas, you might recall leadership had a lot of skills under influence and a new set of skills for development. So if you want to be responsible for the development and growth of people, literally their future resting on your shoulders, then you might just make a good leader or manager. When you move into leadership, you're responsible for setting a vision, inspiring your team, empowering them to do their best work, and developing them to help them live into their full potential. You also have to be willing to step into difficult conversations. Sometimes those are interpersonal challenges within your team. Sometimes you have to let someone go who isn't a good fit or is creating more strain on the team than they're adding value. Sometimes there are conversations that just aren't fair. I once had someone come to me who was told they had to fire 2 people on the team just 3 weeks into their new leadership role. That's a tough one. And then there's the discussion on credit and blame. Now, as a leader, you have to always be willing to give credit to the team and take responsibility when things go sideways. And they will go sideways. Taking credit won't help you climb the ladder. And throwing a team member under the bus is a sign of poor leadership. Remember, it's not about position. It's about responsibility. And ultimately, the responsibility rests on your shoulders. Look, leadership is hard. It isn't something you can do alone. You're going to have to learn new skills, exercise new muscles, find help from others, get a coach, build an inner circle, or your own personal board of advisors. Find people to reach out to that you can learn from and whom you can teach in return. A quick word on coaches. There are a lot of people out there who call themselves coaches. Do your homework. Interview a couple. Make sure that the ones that you're interviewing have been through training and certification. A lot of them haven't. Just because you've been through a life transition or held a management role one time does not mean you'll be a good coach. Being a good coach, like moving into leadership, requires learning a new set of skills, exercising different muscles. It takes training, practice, and time. So make sure your coach has been through a proper training and certification program. Also, coaching can get deeply personal. Anyone who's had a good coach will tell you it's one of the best investments that they've made. Just make sure that you select the coach who's the right fit for you. Okay, as promised, as we're rounding this down, since you stuck around to the end, here's a few free gifts for you. If you're interested in getting a copy of the Career Index report, use the bit.ly DCI-report link. If you found something valuable in today's discussion and you're interested in exploring coaching for personal development or moving into leadership, you can sign up for a free 40-minute intro to coaching session. Just use the ZWC-coaching link. These are private one-on-one coaching sessions. I'll work with you through a current challenge in a private one-on-one video call. And if you want to grab a copy of these slides, you can head over to the bit.ly ZWC-DesignX link. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Todd. That was incredibly informative. Thank you so much. I think much like the it always helps when someone with your years of experience and learnings can demystify some of the messy part of our career paths. Much like how we were discussing how we both have like nicely organized frames, but usually behind them
it's a mess behind it.
Yes. Absolutely. This was an incredible session. Thank you.
My pleasure, Preet. Thanks for the invite.
All
right, cheers.
Bye.
All right.